Welcome to NCSS Here for You. For over 50 years, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to quality psychosocial services to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. We take our role in the community seriously, and we strive to provide the highest quality services. According to Eric Erickson, a noted developmental psychologist, every person must pass through a series of 8 interrelated stages over the entire life cycle. NCSS provides a continuum of services to meet the needs of individuals who at any point seek assistance. NCSS's purpose is creating a stronger community, one person at a time. Now, let's get to today's show. I'm Joe Halko, Director of Community Relations for Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, and welcome to another episode of NCSS Here for You. Each month on this program, we discuss a human services topic, and we do that with staff from one of our 3 service divisions. Our service divisions are Behavioral Health Services, Children, Youth, and Family Services, and Developmental Services. And, on occasion, we have guests from organizations that NCSS collaborates with throughout the year. This month's episode is titled Sexting and How to Talk to Young People About It. Over the past few years, sexting, which is taking, sending, or receiving sexually explicit pictures, videos, or messages through electronic devices, has gained mainstream attention. During today's episode, we'll explore information on how to talk to young people about this difficult and sometimes uncomfortable topic. We'll also discuss the legal implications for youth in Vermont, as well as the cultural, developmental, and relational context of sexting in the lives of young people in rural communities. To discuss this subject in greater detail, I'm pleased to introduce this month's guest, and that's Amanda Rohdenburg, who is the outreach advocate and educator at Voices Against Violence. Amanda, I'd like to welcome you to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Amanda, let's begin with what is sexting and what does it encompass?
So sexting is a slang term that was created by pushing sex and texting together. And so sexting is then a sexual text exchange, and it can happen over a huge variety of social media and electronic devices. So it could be, it's not just texting anymore. It could be through text, it could be through Facebook, it could be through Twitter or Instagram. It could happen on an iPad or an iPhone. Any type of camera phone would be able to work, and several types of apps, including Snapchat.
So basically any type of a mobile device of any sort, I guess, is basically what you're...
Really any digital exchange that is of a sexual nature between 2 people over any type of media. And it can include pictures, partially nude, completely nude, or it could just be a sexual exchange.
Now, what possesses a teen to sext?
I don't know if possesses is the right word, because it's not as though they're being overcome by hormones or demons, but they're, all ages of people send these types of messages, not just teens. So it's happening all over the place, members of Congress, celebrities. And so it's being pretty widely accepted by the broader culture. It's even really commonly referred to in popular magazines like Cosmo. In 2013, Cosmo published an article that listed sending partially nude photos under the list of activities that you would normally find under first base, in their opinion. So a really widely accepted magazine and a really sort of tame first base, and now this is being included in those sort of normal activities. And experts say that sexting is really on the spectrum of normal sexual behaviors, and so the problem becomes when it involves people who are underage and when those pictures get out of hand.
Now, isn't one of the biggest problems of sexting that the images are shared without permission?
Yeah, so consent is a huge concern when it comes to sexting. Consent means that there are words and actions that show that everyone freely agrees and wants to do the same thing. And it is a process that everyone needs to keep on doing during an activity, and it can only exist when there is a balance of power. So for example, if there's a huge age difference, if there's a gap in experience, or if one person isn't aware of the negative consequences that might come of it. and the ability for either party to change their mind or say no at any time. And so consent becomes a problem when the pictures are out of somebody's control and are shared without permission, because then consent can't exist and it becomes a type of sexual abuse or digital abuse. And I want to say that the abuse that exists in this media, this type of digital abuse, isn't rooted in the kids or the technology. It's really rooted in the same sexist and violent bedrock that all types of sexual violence come from. And so it's not so much that kids are abusing this power, it's that abuse is happening, and it's happening over a range of human experiences, and now an online experience has to be included in that understanding.
So you're saying that basically if this particular form didn't exist, there would still be those behaviors, it's just that they wouldn't be taking place in this fashion.
Exactly.
So why do individuals share sex with other people?
I think that it comes from the types of messages that young people get bombarded with, especially through pop culture and messages about relationships in general. So, for example, young boys are often stereotyped as these hormone-drenched hooligans who can't control themselves, and they are really put under a lot of pressure to be these sex-driven creatures and feel the need to prove themselves in the same way that girls are taught to be constantly seeking approval, especially based on their appearance. And so you have these two sort of forces at work that create the conditions that this is happening under.
Now, is it against the law to send a sex to someone who doesn't want it?
That's a really good question that I'm not sure of the answer to. So it would be against the law to send a photograph of somebody who was under the age of 18 in a compromising way. It would be against the law to harass somebody digitally. And so if the behavior was ongoing, if it was harassing, if it was sexual harassment, then I'm sure that it could be considered. I think that it would depend on the case.
Now, what are some of the consequences of taking, sending, or forwarding a sext?
I talk to kids a lot about this, and I think that what I hear a lot from them is that sexting happens because of this sort of need for approval, or wanting to have proof, or any of those types of things that drive them. It can also feel really good. It's instant feedback, which is something that kids are embedded with now because of things like Facebook and Twitter. You know, you get a thumbs up and you get a lot of them, and that feels really good. And so I think that the negative consequences come in when that media is used to hurt or abuse. And so once the images are out there and beyond the control of the people who are in them, then you hear a lot about anxiety, depression, kids being harassed in schools, sexually harassed in schools, and sort of the social anxiety that comes from it. I think it's one of the biggest detriments, because it's a hugely violating experience to have people see you naked without your permission, and that's essentially what's happening here.
Now, are there websites or hotlines that people can contact for assistance?
So I can be contacted at Voices Against Violence. The number is 524-6575, and that's a 24-hour hotline. There are also some great websites. The Youth Advocacy Task Force VT.wordpress.com is a blog that is geared toward adults who have youth in their lives and how to be good advocates and allies for them. They're a great resource. Loveisrespect.org is a site aimed for young people who have questions about relationships and abuse in relationships, and they have a great section on digital abuse. And scarletteen.com has a huge range of sexual health information, and they also have a really great section on relationships and abuse.
And how can they get in touch with you again?
The number is 524-6575, and we also are on Facebook and Twitter at Voices 802, and we have a website, voicesagainstviolence.org.
Okay, now what can parents do to ensure that their teens understand the implications of sexting?
I think it's really important to talk to young people about how to incorporate humanity and civility in all of their interactions, and those interactions include your digital life. And so for parents to be a good resource for their kids, they have to know what's going on, so stay up to date on the technology and the things that kids are using, and the best way to do that is to ask them about it, and be open to the responses and be willing to talk to them about things like consent and how to be a good partner, which includes being trustworthy with sensitive materials.
Mm-hmm. Now, how have you seen things change over the last few years since you've really been involved with this area?
I think that people are starting to understand that the behavior isn't going away. It's here, and we have to talk about it. I think that there is a more solid understanding that this isn't just happening to teens, that it's happening across the age range. Anybody who's got a camera phone these days is suspect. And I think that the shift needs to be away from sort of the scaremongering, this is the end of your life, the sort of doom and gloom tragedy, and really embracing the understanding that, yes, the internet never forgets, but your internet life, like your regular life, is long and complicated, and this won't be the thing that defines you.
And you had mentioned, and rightfully so, that in a lot of these circumstances, the individuals who may have never been suffering from anxiety before, all of a sudden are thrust into a situation where now they become very anxious, maybe depressed. Yeah. So that then, of course, brings into play some of the services that NCSS could provide or help someone who's struggling with that. But as you look out forward, and I mean, you begin to see how things are changing, what do you see?
I've talked to some NCSS workers about their experience working with young people who are engaging in this, and it seems like there has to be a better answer than just don't do it. And I think the answer is figuring out ways that kids can redirect the creative energies that they have in engaging in social media, and reclaiming the power of social media to create voices for kids who feel like they don't have a place in the world. And so I was talking to one NCSS worker about, maybe encouraging a client to take a selfie, which is a picture of oneself, take a selfie and use a computer program to create like an Andy Warhol of yourself, which would be a really great and positive art experience that you could then post and get all of the instant feedback about something that you've created, instead of having the focus be on your appearance and how many likes you can get for a beach selfie versus a piece of artwork that you created with a photo of yourself.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. And the other part of it is that social media, there's a lot of positive things that social media can do, and all of these various elements that you've talked about, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, what have you, is getting people to understand ways to use them in a positive vein to counter perhaps some of their unfortunate or bad experiences.
Yeah, I think that older generations who have not grown up with this sort of digital immersion have this distinct sense of separation. There's your offline life and your online life, and kids don't have that same experience anymore. It's just your life. You have one collective experience, and it moves seamlessly from online to offline and back again. And so I think changing our understanding so that we are promoting a sense of authenticity in kids is a really great way to promote the more positive aspects of digital use. So, for example, it can be a really creative and empowering experience to create an online profile, because you have to think really intentionally about how you want the world to see you, and talking to kids about how do you want the world to see you, what do you want to portray to the broader community, and how do you make that match your authentic self. I think it's a really great and powerful conversation to have with young people.
Do you think there's a lot of those discussions going on, or do you think we're at the embryonic stage of?
Oh, I hope that they are, but I think that we're still at the point where folks are a little bit maybe intimidated by young people, intimidated by the wealth of knowledge, and a little bit scared to talk to them about it, because adults don't want to be seen as incompetent or ignorant or any of the things that talking to young people about the internet might make us feel. Yeah. And so embrace your discomfort, move beyond it, ask them. And they might be really happy to be the expert for once and be able to teach you a thing or two. And that makes you a really good resource for them, because then you know what's going on, and you've shown that you're willing to listen to them and take a step back and let them be the expert, which is great.
Yeah, and that breaking down those barriers certainly can lead to relationships be getting better, closer, than perhaps, as you say, not being willing to sit and listen and know that you can't know everything.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way.
And you're definitely not going to know more than your kid about, unless you're some kind of programmer or tech genius, you're not going to know more than your kid about what's going on online. So being a part of youth culture is really exciting, and it can be really enlightening and scary for adults to try to engage in that, but it's really worth it.
Yeah, you look at things like you're saying, the digital world versus, the world that preceded it. And one thing that I'm thinking about as you're saying that is that how many young people today have a very hard time writing. Actually writing cursive, because they don't do it that often.
Yeah.
It's not required. Where someone who's older, they grew up that way, they understand that, and digital's a little more of a challenge for them. So it's kind of turning the tables. But talking about this whole topic, though, how do you see it as a part of bullying, and especially when it comes to people that are school-aged?
Yeah, these images, once they're shared, are often shared with peers, and that can hugely contribute to instances of sexual harassment in schools. And I'm intentionally removing that word bullying because for a few reasons, but the most prevalent for me is that when you're taking a nude image of somebody and you're sharing it with those peers, probably what's going to happen afterward is not bullying, it's sexual harassment. And it's really important to note that, because then it becomes a part of the Title IX discussion and whether or not kids are able to have access to the education that they deserve because of harassment in schools. So for example, if your whole school has seen a picture of you nude or partially nude, and the instances, even if harassment isn't blatant or outright in schools, the sense of anxiety and pressure that you feel walking back into that school can be completely overwhelming, can make you not want to go to school, perform poorly in school, not reach out to services, not engage in after-school activities because you're so intimidated. And any of those things really compromises one's ability to get the education that they deserve.
So true. Now, I know that you've done a lot of work in the community on this topic, and also certainly domestic and sexual violence. But could you share with the viewers just some of the ways that you have been able to address these situations and try to educate people and turn the table so that they get a better understanding?
My favorite thing to do around this topic is work with both service providers and young people and use both of those platforms to inform the other. So for example, I was in BFA for a lot of single workshops. I met with almost every high school class at BFA last year. And what I did was help them brainstorm answers to questions like, why might somebody sext? What are the cultural impacts in the school when this happens? What are the personal impacts when this happens? What are the impacts when a picture is shared without that person's consent? And I think what that did was really allow students to say what they already knew, because at the end of the day, they know much more about what's going on than even I do, especially in their own lives. They're the experts. And so allowing them the space to come up with very easy brainstorms to these questions was a good way to reflect back to them the implications of what was going on. So for example, they were really able to identify that there are all types of reasons why somebody might sext, because they're in a relationship, because they want somebody to like them, because they felt pressured to, whether by friends or by a partner, because somebody might have been blackmailing them with pictures that they had gotten before, or maybe threatening them with harm, or with breaking up if they didn't send them pictures, any of those types of things. And then they were able to make the leap to the emotional impacts that were happening. So how betrayed somebody might feel if their partner shared a photo without their consent, or how anxious they might feel once that picture had gotten out of their hands, or how depressed they might feel or ashamed if their parents found out about it. And I think that was a really valuable experience for me and for them, because then I'm not walking in and lecturing to them about why you shouldn't do this thing. They were really able to hear from their peers about how it felt to have that happen.
And I agree with you that this is not strictly an adolescent thing. You know, that as we know, as you know, national politicians who are much older than adolescent years and what have you, and football players and what have you, have done sexting. But how do you see the dynamics between, let's say, parents who are not from the digital age and are trying to get their arms around this, and their children who are involved in this? Are you seeing that there's been any headway or positive movement in their understanding of how to deal with this, or is it something that still needs a lot of work?
I think that it's a yes and. Yes, there's been headway and there's a lot of work to be done. I think that teen sexuality is something that's really difficult for adults to grasp, and difficult for them to talk about because it makes us so uncomfortable. And kids really sense that discomfort, and so it sort of drives it underground and makes those conversations harder to have. And I think that, you know, even though all types of people are engaging in this behavior, it's especially frightening for us to consider it happening to young people, because they are already so vulnerable, because we already fear so much them being taken advantage of, and because we really care about their futures and we don't want this to impact them. And so I think that the fear comes from a very valid place, but it's used to sort of silence the experience of young people and make them less willing to talk to us about what's going on. So for example, if we're talking exclusively about the legal implications of what might happen to you if you're an underage person who's sexting, then it might keep someone who has been taken advantage of or being exploited by an older person from reporting what's happening to them, because they don't want to also get in trouble themselves. And so I think that even though it comes from a place of concern, shifting that conversation to a more positive and open-minded place would do our youth a world of service.
You know, what's interesting as you're saying all of this is it reminds me, it's almost like a stigmatizing thing that people don't want to talk about this. Very much like a lot of what NCSS deals with, which is when you start talking about mental health disorders, is that even though 1 in 4 to 5 people every year may deal or struggle with a mental health illness like depression or anxiety or substance use or something along those lines, is they find it very, very hard to A, talk about it, and B, seek treatment, because they feel as if there's this stigma surrounding it and that they can't do that because they're going to be deemed as a lesser person, which of course, that couldn't be further from the truth, because just like with physical health, if you go out and break your arm, it doesn't mean you're going to say, oh, I don't want to seek treatment because it's stigmatizing. Of course you're going to get the treatment that you need. It's the same way with a mental illness, that that person should want to seek the treatment so that they could overcome that situation. And it sounds to me there's kind of a parallel here where between the parents and the young people and what have you, that there's just this perhaps stigma that makes people not want to sit down and talk about these topics.
Absolutely, and I think that that goes hand in hand with all different types of abuse. So domestic violence, we see that all the time. Sexual violence, we see that all the time. And this is just another type of relational violence and digital abuse. And so it's really unsurprising that that happens, and also really harmful that it happens.
And speaking of the sexual and domestic violence, have you seen over the past several years where technology has played a part in any kind of a shift in what you're seeing as far as those that you're serving?
Absolutely. Technology can be used to stalk a former or current partner, track their movements. It can be used to harass them or abuse them, just like any other type of medium. I've seen a huge increase in, for lack of a better term, it's called revenge porn, where sensitive photos are uploaded and shared on the internet without that person's permission, as a form of violation to that person. And so I think as technology shifts, so will the landscape of abuse as a whole. In fact, I'm going to a summit in San Jose, California at the end of this month, with a member of the Grand Isle Sheriff's Department. And the topic will be around technology and abuse and how we can shift our understandings to better address those needs.
I see. Okay, well, believe it or not, we're out of time for this month. And I certainly appreciate all of your thoughts and comments, Amanda. So, I want to thank my guest, Amanda Rohdenburg, for being on the show today and sharing her insights on sexting and how to talk to young people about it. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for spending time with us again this month. You can learn more about NCSS and all of our programs and services by logging on to ncssinc.org. I'm Joe Halko, and I'll be back next month with another episode of NCSS Here for You. This has been another episode of NCSS Here for You. We hope that you found today's discussion informative and educational. For over 50 years, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to quality psychosocial services to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. Thanks once again for tuning in this month. NCSS's purpose remains creating a stronger community, one person at a time.